Thanks very much. So obviously in this stream of the RAP program that we're working on, Dave's been very closely involved. John Schepis, our global director, who's sponsoring the program within Worley's. Andrea from Ames gives us a bunch of info, and also Zoran and Mark from QEZ, who are on the calls every week. There's a lot of other people who are also on the calls giving us input from the RAP program. Appreciate that. I know a lot of you are in the room, and I've met a lot of you today for the first time. I mean, the aquaculture study, by its very nature, delivers a lot of organisms in bulk style. So, whilst we're looking at one aspect, it is the culmination of a lot of the RAP study programs, the mechanism to deliver the corals to the reef. And at the bottom there was the coral fragmentation, a couple of substrates which fall under this one. Our scope was to develop a base case of a factory model that, using modern production methods and automation, could deliver a certain number of corals to the reef. And later on in the financial modelling aspect, it may be a model, a distributed model, where we'd have sites in different parts of the reef, because we understand the potential differences when we deploy these things. And it might be for different strains of corals that are done in different facilities. So that's part of our study, but a later part of it. So in our base case, there were three fundamental mechanisms we could deliver these to the reef. One was by direct larval dispersal, one was larval recruits on distribution devices, and the other form was juvenile corals. Our study looked at larval recruits on distribution devices, so similar to the Secor devices you can see in the photo there. But we had to come up with a number of how many corals would be a good relative base case to put out onto the reef. We looked at a couple of reefs. Davis Reef has copped the hammering this morning, but it's up there again with One Tree Reef. And all up was a 15 kilometre square. And we assumed it was ecologically significant. If we looked at the scale of the task on this reef, it was 15 kilometres square, and we assumed 30% coral dominated area, so 5 kilometres squared of corals. And of that coral dominated area, there was 30% coral cover. So 2 kilometres squared of treatment would be required. Using the Davis Reef as a typical reef with 3 kilometres squared of coral, and we assume that one target coral reaches sexual maturity per metre squared for 10% of that coral area, then 300,000 corals would need to reach sexual maturity. Assuming deployment is coral recruits on a device like the Secor I showed earlier, 10% of the tiles that survives in 2 years, we'd need 3 million devices for that reef. What rate would we then need to produce for the whole GPR? Well, if we assume there were 100 reefs we needed to treat, and how many years we wanted to spread the treatment over, 10 years, we'd be looking at 30 million devices a year going out to the reef, or 9 million a quarter. So we took this base case as a worst case scenario, and we ran with these numbers to determine the R&D requirement to further develop and test this base case concept. And we wanted to understand the production cost, as Dave showed earlier, per unit at this phase 1, and it would be further refined in phase 2. And we could see the key research bottlenecks where if things were cracked, like out of season sporting, what the upside would be in terms of unit cost that was deployed. And so we worked through the hatchery model, the broodstock creation, the broodstock holding. Would broodstock be held in situ for set 1, or in tanks, or genetically modified ones later on through the different sets? Well, we assume broodstock holding. Spawning, could we spawn out of season? It hadn't been, at the time, it hadn't been cracked, but we thought it was currently feasible, and there was a RAP program looking at the out of season spawning. We did modelling around microfragmentation to see if there was an upside in microfragmentating, and it was actually a better case than the out-of-season spawning. So we adopted the out-of-season spawning and kept the microfragmentation as a backup, effectively, that could be done in the same facilities, but over a longer period as the corals grew out. We looked at the settlement and the settlement device design, because this whole thing had to be automated. The Lego example that Dave mentioned, how could we get the larvae settled and the settlement devices into transport boxes and shipped offshore and deployed? And then the reef deposition, how do you structure the barges going to and from and deploy? That case example study of effectively 9 million a quarter. And then there were a lot of engineering inputs we had to pull together. So we quickly did a brainstorm, and this was it in the early stages. What design inputs we needed, from water quality, flow rates, survival rates at the different stages, what infrastructure, and trying to act as the link between the existing ceasing facility, which had a lot of information, and the scientists and the engineers that were pulling all this together. And then we had a process flow chart that was pulled together by the AIMS guys, which showed how they currently did it in the ceasing facility. We had to understand when the aeration was added, how long they were in each stage for the different species, the breaking up of the eggs when they were spawned, and carry that through into our design process. So we had enough of the pieces that an operational person would need to be able to replicate the different stages for the different stages, for the different species, and during the different stages of the life cycle. And then from our case study, we knew we needed to get, let's say, 30 million a year out onto the reef, and we had cracked out of season spawning. So then, to get 9 million a quarter surviving on the reef, from the literature, at deployment, let's say two to 3 months old, we had to deploy 13 million onto the reef. This is a quarter, as an example. To do that, we had to look at my notes for this. For the corals, we had to have 39 million leave the hatchery. Now, I'll explain why. This is factored up by 3 at this stage, plus their survival rates built in. I'll show you why later in a further slide. For 4, we had to have 221 million settled in the hatchery. And this is factored up as well because of the way we proposed, which I'll also show later, and also includes survival and factors like that. We had to have 273 go into the larval rearing tanks. We had to have 303 million fertilised eggs. And we had to have 1,200 broodstock corals for our concept to work. Settlement device design. This was important because we needed to work out a way that it could be automated. And Andre at AIMS came up with this idea, and it's the one we've run with in the concept. This is effectively what we've been calling a choco board, which is a PCB type design, but it's ceramic. And they're 14mm by 14mm squares. And these boards would be laid on the settlement tanks. And when you see the settlement tanks in a minute, they have a way of design to allow for these things to be settled. And the number we adopted was 5. We were 2 to 7 corals would settle per 14mm square. So we adopted 5. So that was one of the factors you saw in the last slide there. So this board was assumed it could be moved easily around the process facility and to offshore. And then prior to offshore, we needed to attach it to some ballast device. The Sakura example being the ballast in a typical case. But I'll talk about that next. So then we had to come up with a new design that could be automated. This is Baxter from Rethink Robotics. He exists. And he'd have to do 25 a minute is the current calculations. But effectively you can see the choco boards being inserted on 3 sides there. So you can see there's that's why there was the factoring of 3 on that previous slide. for the deployment, and it's attached to a deployable ballast and deployed in areas of. So, based on that original case study, the assumption of these would be that of the 13 million deployed, 9 million would reach survival at the end of 1 year on that reef, and that was just so we had a relative number that could be used in our case study, and working backwards to what the size of the facilities would need to be. And that was it. Broodstock holding. Oh, sorry. Stocking density. Broodstock, is 632 broodstock would be required. 24 is the stocking density, how many per tank. You can see the tank there on the left, the design. There was 26 tanks would be required of that density, and that's of the assumption that you can crack out of season sporting, 4 sporting events a year. And just to give you some background on the engineering design aspects of it, there's a typical tank there with pedestrian access around the side. They're custom-made moulded glass fibre with clear observation tanks on each side. PVC pipes running around and suspended overhead controllable lighting. Translucent roof with blinds for the out-of-season sporting work. Fertilisation. So that assumed there were 11 million eggs coming from each broodstock tank. The stocking density was 329 larvae per fill. And the tank wasn't really a controlling factor because it could all actually go in one of the tanks. But for design purposes, and I'll show you some of them later, you'll have multiple of them serviced by a number of broodstock tanks. And to put it in perspective, there's a tank there on the right, 924 litres. And the intention is multiple broodstock tanks with feeder fertilisation tanks. These would be mobile with their own aeration supply and then gravity fed to the larval tanks. So in the larval tanks, there's 273 million larvae at a stocking density of 0.3 per mil, and that would give you 910 tanks. So we're talking about a significant setup, similar plumbing and tank layout. The gravity delivery pipework from the fertilisation platform runs down the centre between the tanks, which branches to each tank, and same down to the settlement tanks from the larval. So from fertilisation to larval to settlement. And here's the settlement tank design. So you can see that wafer design at the bottom that I mentioned before for the settlement, get maximum layout of those choco settlement tiles over the area, and to support automation to pull them out for offshore deployment. There'd be 220 million introduced for settlement, 32,000 settlement squares, each 14 mil by 14 mil, with 5 on each of those 14 mil. So 40 million settlement tiles would be shipped offshore in purpose-built transportation containers. Right, I'll have to speed up a little bit. On these, this is the outdoor area. It's semi-enclosed, proposed into the settlement tanks. Reef deployment, the concept is, and we've been doing a bunch of value engineering around here about what the best solution is, but it would be a big barge shipping off special transportation cases of choco boards, and then there'll be a smaller barge deploying the corals and putting together the deployment device and dropping the corals at the right spot within the degraded reef that was selected. So it'd be 20 vessels a day, doing 12,000 devices a vessel, and they're only deploying for 60 days of the quarter because the first month's purely in the hatchery. So from month 2 to 3 onwards they could deploy, and that's how you got 221,000 going out a day. Just quickly, the concept would be there's 6 process trains here, each with their own shed, to deal with the amount of tanks that are required. And this was the gravity piece that I mentioned before, from the broodstock tanks at the top in the left-hand side there, feed into the fertilisation tanks, which would be mobile, fill into the larval tanks, fill into the settlement tanks. Overall layout, but if you zoom in on this plan here, those ones down the middle, labelled number 1, are the broodstock. You can see the larval tanks and then the settlement tanks on the thing. So a pretty big undertaking, 2 hectares there, but not unachievable. And then I mentioned translucent roofing for the settlement tanks. This was working out how many hours a day of shading they would get to check we had the requirement, met the requirement. And obviously this is modelled on 1 facility, but that slide I showed 3 before had 6, so that could be decentralised to Townsville, Cairns, Rocky, for example, to deal with the different temperature issues. All right, Dave's telling me to come up. We're not up to this stage yet, but capital cost is our next stage where we're going to price up to build this whole thing and implement it. Thank you.
We don't have time for questions, so we're just going to have to keep going. Lots of design assumptions in there, just as Andrew Hayward is coming up. Andrew, Brian, are you coming?